Given today is 9/11, I felt it would be appropriate to discuss an aspect of 9/11. Because as religious individuals, 9/11 represents a tremendous challenge. Because the hijackers basically were saying, we are doing this because God told us to do it. So if they got the right God, does it mean what they did was okay? Okay, to exemplify this, in the early 80s, I had a friend of mine who became, I think, a Belzer Chassid. And we were discussing Khomeini. And he said to me, Halavai, Khomeini was a frum rabbi. That's what we need, Rabbanim like Khomeini. I disagreed with him. But if you think about it, what he was saying was, we're against Khomeini, but just because he has the object wrong. We're not against what he's going to do. We're against what he's what?
Mosquito, right? Yeah, you got it. Okay. Someone's gonna.
Okay. Okay. Anyways, we're against Khomeini. He's saying this because he's got it wrong. He's promoting Islam, but if he would take the exact same methodology and apply it to Judaism, how wonderful it would be. I disagreed. But that represents a tremendous issue in terms of religious consciousness. Is it the actual methodology that's bothering you, or is it just the object? In other words, you're a fan of the what do you call Pittsburgh Steelers, and you dislike the New England Patriots. So you like Roethlisberger as quarterback and you hate Brady as quarterback. And you'll constantly criticize Brady, but if Brady got traded over to Pittsburgh, you say, great, I'm happy. In other words, really, he's a good quarterback. It's just he's quarterbacking for another team. So that becomes an issue. So when you look at 9/11, you have to ask it, are you against this in principle? There's something wrong with killing innocents by flying a jet into the World Trade Tower because there's something inherently wrong with it, even if it was done in the name of my religion? Or is it because it was done in the name of another religion that really bothered you? Or can you explain why it's done in the name of your religion would never happen? Right? That's the challenge that really hits you with 9/11. You have to maintain the fact that this is something that cannot happen within my faith, and I explain that why. Or you have to be able to say what the distinction is, or you have to sit there and say, listen, the only problem is they got the wrong team. But if they had the right team, they'd be correct. So that's the challenge that 9/11 presents to religious individuals. It's very interesting. George Bush kept on talking about they weren't religious, because they didn't abide by his values of religion. The fact is they were religious. And the fact is that the only person who could have done that is a religious individual. Okay, they're the only ones who could have even done such a thing. Okay, because what happens with religion is you negate the rationalism of this world and you say that there is another definition, another perception. So you basically say that I have to respond to the other perceptions. Therefore, rather than it being right to not kill innocents, becomes right to kill innocents because you throw in this random variable called a deity. And it's a very powerful issue that is often overlooked. Okay. Comments?
Well, you were saying only a religious person could have done this, but immediately I thought of the guy in Norway, whatever his name was, right? That was not religious, and the guy in Oklahoma, that was also not religious.
Okay, so the fact is you have to believe in some value. You have to have some value, and it's interesting because now you think in terms of the Rav. The Rav Soloveitchik says there's no such thing as atheism. If you look at communists, they talk about atheists, but really they have a new god. It's called communism. So the fact is that it's interesting because my wife was watching a movie last night. It sort of interests me. I watched it for a few minutes it's a Robert Redford movie about the only woman hung in the Lincoln assassination. She was one of the conspirators, and she hung. And of course, this movie is trying to say that she was set up and it really didn't happen. There was like another, sort of like a attack upon government, and you watch it for a few minutes and you think the judges are all corrupt and the government is all corrupt, so forth and so forth. So I watched it for a few minutes. I went back to Google and I said, I wonder really what the story is. She wasn't such a tzaddik. Okay. The point is that there's a little machlokes, maybe she shouldn't have done it, but it's not so simple. It seems that there was pretty good evidence that she was conspiring. So I looked around a little bit, and I looked a little bit at statements of John Wilkes Booth. The person was, there was a statement made by someone said about Booth about how this person didn't do it for money. He did it because of convictions. Fortunately, he was wrong. But you talk about that, the convictions. He was Meiser Nefesh for his convictions, to apply that term. He knew he was going to die because of this, but it was so valuable to try and save the self. So the fact is that you have to have that type of devotion. But then when we look at that statement, we have to figure out, okay, what really is Mesiras Nefesh? Can you have Mesiras Nefesh that goes contrary to the values of the world? How can we state that something like 9/11 could not happen al pi Torah, and that type of Mesiras Nefesh is not acceptable al pi Torah? Or is there some definition within the Jewish world that defines this as unacceptable within the Jewish perspective, not just because they got it wrong? Now, to take it a little bit further and make it real. In the post-Holocaust age, every Jew runs into this problem, because when people speak about the Holocaust, they specifically talk about how genocide is evil. We can't hold genocide as evil. That is not acceptable within the Torah perspective. Why? Because we are commanded to commit genocide. Right? Man, woman, and child.
We just read it.
Right? Mm-hmm. We just read it yesterday. We are commanded to kill. So you say, so someone said to me, you know what evil is? Evil is killing children. Guess what? We're evil. We have a mitzvah, a chiyuv, to kill man, woman, and child from a malek. So when you look at it, and lahavdil havdei havdalos, what is the distinction between the Jewish sivoy of killing a malek and lahavdil, the Nazi perception that they had to kill Jews? It's just that we got it right and they got it wrong. No, which is a possibility. Then you have to find it, okay? But the point is, and if you look at Hitler, Yamach Shemo, he wasn't in it for the money. He wasn't like your normal, hedonistic dictator, right? He had goal. In fact, not only that, someone asked me a question about the Parsha Zohar. You're supposed to remember a Malik, you're supposed to destroy it, but you have to remember it, right? So how do you kill him out and remember it? So I said to someone, remember the Havdalah. Okay, I want to make it clear that this is a sensitive subject. What did Hitler want to do? He wanted to collect all these Jewish artifacts to have the museum for the extinct nation. In other words, I want you guys to remember this nation of quote-unquote evil that he destroyed, because it was so significant. The point is that the problem with Hitler and the Nazis that, hey, nothing wrong with your methodology. Genocide would be okay. You just got it wrong. You weren't killing people really evil, but to kill people evil, that's fine. So these hijackers would have ran the jet into the new skyscraper in Abu Dhabi, right? Well, you would have said, "Oh, you understand that? Maybe it would have been okay, right? Because they got the real bad guys." But if you argue that there's an inherent problem in this whole methodology, then you have to explain how Torah is different, okay? And it's not so easy. In our world, we assume Torah perspectives in a very easy fashion. And we plug it into North American values and so forth and so forth. but there's a lot of there's a lot more tension and what do you call it? Challenge than most people think. Most of the values that we hold, so like you take the concept of freedom of religion, okay? We live on freedom of religion. We think it's a tremendous concept, right? Okay. If you had a Jewish state, could you practice freedom of religion? If you had a Torah state, could you practice freedom of religion?
Mm-hmm. If it was somebody else's religion?
No, if it was our... Let's say we were in charge.
If you were Mechalel Shabbos, you get stoned.
Yeah. That's contrary to our religion. You come in and say, hi, I'm a Buddhist. I'm a very nice guy. I'm a Buddhist. No.
And I bought the house next door.
What?
And I bought the house next door.
Yeah, well, guess what? You're not going to be living in that house, maybe, right? Okay, so the fact is, but we live on freedom of religion. We consider this value to be significant. What most people don't recognize is the values that are building, America talks in God we trust and so on and so forth. Most of the basic values that come out of the Western society is really an outgrowth of the development of atheism in response to the Catholic Church. Okay, now the philosophers who started didn't want to talk about being atheists because they'd been in a lot of problems. I know there was a whole big issue with Descartes that the church really tried to get him to say something that they could say he was a heretic. He was a very smart guy. He knew exactly what to say and what not to say. But a lot of people argue that he didn't buy the stuff, even though he came across looking like a good Catholic, so he can get away with living in that society. But the fact is that people like Rousseau, which Rousseau is perhaps the most powerful, the French Revolution, the idea of development of the values of freedoms that developed into the American concept. Rousseau, Voltaire, who was a violent anti-Semite, but the Rousseau I don't think was a very religious man. The fact is, many of our values that we consider to be so fundamental really are challenged by religion. That's why in the last 50 years, so much of the developments of the freedoms have developed into areas where we're beginning to wonder what's happening. The development of the sexual promiscuity and the rights of the gays and so forth and so forth. They really are challenging religion, because religion basically says there's a standard for, and their argument is, what are you talking about? It's freedom. I'm not bothering you. It's freedom. You're right. Same thing as freedom of religion. We should let these people do whatever they want. So the fact is what about we who have benefited from religion? If we were in charge, were we actually going around stoning people?
It's not democratic.
No, it's not.
But we believe in modern Western society, in democracy, which then promotes freedom of religion.
Right, and if we do, then how is it that you can also believe in Torah? That's part of the issue. But going back to this issue, the fact is that when you look at an issue like 9/11, you're really dealing with a tremendous challenge of understanding how we relate with Western values and how we can apply this in terms of a Torah perspective. And it's not so simple to work it out. Okay, I can only say, that I don't think it's so easy that we'd be killing people from Mechil Shabbos, by the way. I don't think so. I don't think it's so easy for us to kill anyone, but that's beside the point. But these are issues that I think are fundamental. I know in the case of Amalek, I have a whole Dvar Torah that argues that the right way of fulfilling the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is by converting them. That really what you should do is convert them, and if you convert them, then they lose their Shem Amalek. They lose their name of Amalek, and therefore you've actually fulfilled the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek by converting them. And that might be a simple way. If you have a lot of Amaleki children, you throw them in a mikvah and make them Jews, and they'll be okay. Maybe there'll be a way of working it out. The fact is it's a little bit more of a constellated, but the fact is that I never saw anyone who said that. My Rebbe found one person who said it b'di'evid, if you convert an Amaleki, you may fulfill the mitzvah, and that was from Rabbi Charlot, who was the Talmud of the Raya Cook. In one of his form, he says b'di'evid, you can become this. It's the most I've ever heard on this subject. But the fact is, it deals with the issue. Okay, so what we have to deal with now is, and I'm going to move this into perspective in terms of 9/11, and this does connect to tshuva and the self in a certain way, because it involves a dynamic in our relationship with Torah. See, there's a simplistic way that people look at Torah and the statement of Torah. Torah can be God speaks, God says jump, you ask how high, right? Most people's perception of Torah is that Torah is set over to people who are blank pages, right? So you have no opinion, and God says, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, and it's great. And the truth is, if you have no opinion, you won't have any questions, okay? If I don't feel anything, then, so what? It's wrong to do that? Okay. It's nice, it's good to do that? Fine. I don't have any opinion. So if you don't have any opinion, you can basically just integrate whatever is the imposed opinion from Torah. That's the way most people try to present a Torah perspective. Okay? And in fact, in many ways, what occurs in certain educational structures within our greater Jewish society is the attempt to try and minimize any conflict by minimizing any expression of the self within the human being. If a girl is not interested in dancing, she won't have problems later on with wanting to be a dancer, right? So if you have no interest in doing all these things, you won't have any problems. If you have no interest in baseball, you won't be Mevatel Torah by watching baseball. So the fact is one of the simple ways of ensuring that you're going to follow this system perfectly is by absolutely not developing any self-interest or self. The perception that I think is a more correct perception of Torah is the fact that there's a necessity for the self to be involved. That is God does not speak to blank pages. God specifically speaks to individuals who already have a personhood, already has a mind. Okay? Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai had somewhat of their own perceptions. That's why they asked certain questions. The fact is if you don't have any perceptions, you're actually going to miss the actual lesson of Torah. Because the way Torah is constructed is that what God tells you at first may not be what He really wants you to do. If you take it like a blank page, you're going to miss what He really wants. Because what He really wants is, because of your own mind and your own self and your own thinking, you're going to ask the question, and when you ask that question, He's going to say, precisely, this is what I meant. Okay? In other words, you have to be there. Because the way the Torah is constructed is completely anti-fundamentalist. The concept of fundamentalism is to read the Bible and don't ask any questions. Right? We can't read the Bible that way. Why? Because the whole concept of Torah Shabbat says, don't read the Bible that way. Read the Bible, and the only way you'll ever understand what the Bible is really telling you is if you know how to ask the right question. And the way you know how to ask the right question is if you already have a consciousness that's going to be asked questions. You're going to have a little bit of conflict at first. So the point is that it is important that you are there. So therefore, fundamentally, we're talking before, as I said, the general concept of tshuva and the self. Torah speaks to the self, it speaks to you. And therefore, since it speaks to you, your dynamic with Torah is going to be different than anyone else's dynamic with Torah. And therefore, you are going to come up with your own perception of Torah because of that dynamic, which starts with you being there and being involved in the shak of the Torah, the debate of trying to understand what the Torah is really telling you. And that's a challenge over here. So when you hear this situation like Amalek, you're looking and saying, wait a second, I don't like the idea of a genocide. What do you mean, kill children? Good. So now comes the real investigation of Torah to understand what exactly is the command, or how this is distinctive. and distinguished. So the point is that is what we have to figure out in terms of saying the distinction in Judaism, in Torah, between what happened at 9/11. That has to be our objective. Okay? So the fact is there has to be some type of challenge that we have, that the idea of driving that plane into the World Trade Tower cannot be acceptable within Torah, not just because God didn't command it, because it's impossible within our values and understanding for God to command. And if God did command that, there'll be a way we'd have to understand it, to understand how we connect with all the other values that we're coming up with. And we are constantly involved in that struggle of values. I mean, the Kedesh Yitzchak is exactly the problem with the whole issue of Kedesh Yitzchak, is because God first told Avram that I care about everyone, and then says, don't care. A Kedesh Yitzchak only makes sense. The whole body of Yitzchak only makes sense if you understand that this is the same Avram who argued not to kill stone. Here's Avram saying, "Hey, we know this is evil. This is the evil city of the world, right? We know that. But God, I don't want you to kill these people. Really, they're human beings. Let's try not to kill them. Got to be something righteous, so forth and so forth, right? And yet God turns around and says, "Okay, tomorrow I want you to go kill Yitzchak. No problems." The fact is that that's where the tension of Kedesh Yitzchak comes up, right? God, Avram says, "Hashevet kol haaretz yaseh mishpat." The judge of the world will not do justice. This is who he should. This is my understanding of God. And now he's telling me to do something that's totally unjust. I don't understand it, and that's the tension. And by the way, that tension. There's midrashim who say that when Sarah found out that Avram was going to go and do this, she freaked out because Avram didn't ask any questions. Okay, it wasn't the fact that he went to do it. It was, I don't just get this, right? For those blankety blanks in stone, you're arguing, right? For Yitzchak, you didn't even open your mouth. Wait till he comes home; he's going to hear it from me. Okay. Now you know he didn't make it home. You know, well, when he made it home, maybe he said, okay, it's unfortunate. Okay, but Sarah basically, I guess Avram was protected from what Sarah would have told him in a certain way. Okay, so the fact is that's our challenge. So we have to explain what really is this fundamental difficulty in 9/11 that takes it out of our understanding of a proper religious mindset. Okay, and really what it comes down to is a challenge. These people who were there, they were devoted. They basically believe that God told them to drop that, to just take that plane and destroy the evil empire. And what about the innocents? Well, if they were innocents, okay, and they said this, any real Muslim who would die in 9/11, don't worry, they're getting the virgins as well. That was their answer, right? Since they're going to die because they believe that they're going to go to a good place, they believe that every good Muslim will be happy. When they hear what happened, they'll be happy because any good Muslim will say, "Good, I can also suffer this. I can also, enjoy my heavenly reward," right? So the fact is that killing the innocents are innocents. They're Rishayim. It's America. These are people who absolutely are against the true belief. So how can you understand that? Okay, so I just sit there and say, okay, that's where. So how is it that their perception is totally unacceptable within the perception of Judaism? How is it that Khomeini would not make a good Rav? You guys all think he would. Okay.
No, because he didn't allow for questions. His word is the final word. That's not the Jewish way.
And no one questioned, and there wasn't that tension, as you just explained. There was just blind acceptance. For those who challenged, off with their heads. I mean, gone. The regime didn't keep them.
And who did he consult?
Who?
Khomeini.
Who did Khomeini consult?
Khomeini consult. If he
was the Gadol Hador. He doesn't have to consult anyone.
Exactly.
Well,
so that's it.
But even our Gedolim, nobody operates in a vacuum. Not for very long.
It's interesting because the fact is what you're getting to is some interesting ideas. The fact is, it's not so simple. There's clearly viewpoints within the Jewish world nowadays that say you got to follow without questioning, right? There's viewpoints of that nature, and so how do you deal with understanding those viewpoints as part of Judaism? And there is a perception of someone who ultimately is an authority. So the fact is, you're saying the authority themselves question themselves, but is that really what happens in the Jewish world? Fact is maybe you can question, but the point is that if you question, you have to. It's interesting what you're saying is that in certain ways, people always told me that when they went to Cheder, when they were a little boy in Cheder, if they asked a question to their rabbi, they got a puksh, right? We don't ask questions. I had someone once say that. We never ask why. We just ask how. Halachic questions are how. We never ask why. Well, it's a bit of a problem. But the point is, you hear Jews saying that, so you're saying those Jews aren't real Jews. But the fact is, then you're leaving out a lot of people. So you have to refine this a little bit. You have to refine what you're saying. I'm in agreement with you, but you have to refine what you're saying. You have to refine what your understanding of Gedolim are, in the sense of what really is going on, because there is a challenge that way.
Each of the Gedolim had Hasidim.
That's true.
Accepted blindly.
Totally.
And they didn't question, and the Gedolim accepted those followers.
Right.
And didn't say, well, you have to look at both sides of the issue that I see this way.
Right. And that's a challenge. And sometimes they sit there and say, well, you can't look both ways because it might mislead them and so forth. They might go down the wrong path or whatever. But the fact is those are challenges. So you're saying, okay, so how do you come to this conclusion? What I'm basically saying is obviously there's people within Torah who don't have this conclusion, so how do you argue for your conclusion? I give a little argument from Case Yitzchak, but they'll argue back. What are you talking about? Avram did go and was attempted to makriv Yitzchak. So even though he had questions, he didn't ask the questions. So how can you answer this question? How can you explain it from a Jewish perspective what really is going on? And how do you deal with relationship? Because what's really understanding the idea, there's an aspect of following the leader. I mean, the truth is, if Khomeini said something, okay, he's not some, little guy down the street. He supposedly is the head dude of that religion. Excuse my language, so it's something like, well, wait a second, isn't that what the religion's about? Isn't there this aspect of authority within religions, that there are people who are the leaders of the religion? So well, is there something wrong with that?
Well, Naaseh Nishma is a pretty major concept in Judaism.
So therefore you do without asking.
You do it first and then ask.
Do it first. We'll drive the plane into it and then
we'll question why we did that. Yeah. No, I don't think so. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It was last week or the week before we were sort of learning about how you actually recognize that someone is a Navi, if someone's a prophet. And
right.
One of the tests is, well, do they actually go against the Torah?
Yes.
And if they go against the Torah, well, then it's a false prophet. So I guess you could say some of these fanatic terrorists, whatever, they're false prophets, but because by definition, if you're sort of saying, hey, let's go kill people, and it's against teachings of the religion, then...
But who says against two religions?
Is it?
It's very interesting. I get very upset by this when people talk about Islam. I saw an article in the Jewish Tribune where there were other reasons why the Jewish Tribune presented the article the way it does, but there were some Muslim women who were wearing hijabs or whatever, and someone came over to take photographs of them, and they said, no, you can't photograph us, and so forth and so forth, and
landed them in the face.
Yeah, and she said I was just trying to get away his camera, so forth and so forth. So and it came like we have to balance, freedom of religion with private, with the public right to be able to take pictures and so forth. The problem is, there's a little bit of a problem is that so there was an article that says and we asked some type of a Muslim expert, says, of course there's no prohibition to take photographs, because it says in the time of the Quran they never had cameras. So how can there be a prohibition? So this is obviously crazy, right? Great. Guess what?
Mm-hmm.
Not a good argument. Why?
Because nothing that we do today is in the Torah, because they didn't have.
Good. So you don't think that I've heard that argument about how the crazy Orthodox, right? You can't drive to shul on Shabbos. Did they have cars in the time of the Torah?
Yeah, but the law, secular law, works the same way.
Well, that's not. But the fact is, here we are taking the same argument and trying to attack the Muslims. And wait a second.
Isn't that what we do?
We're using the same argument.
That's not an argument. The fact is Islam is that, hey, understand there's different views of Islam, and there's this guy's view of Islam is the same way as Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism versus Orthodox Judaism. Reform Judaism says same-sex marriage is a mitzvah and an ethical advancement. We say it's an avera and not an ethical advancement. It's an inherent argument. So, and people say, how could Reform Judaism get it? Because if we understand the way Reform Judaism approaches the biblical texts, right, they can come up with that conclusion pursuant to their religion. It's not pursuant to our understanding. And they'll turn around and say, where do you get the idea that you can't drive on Shabbos? Because the fact is that's the balance. We don't want to recognize that the distinctions between the branches of Judaism, they make the distinctions in Christianity pale in comparison. Christians are the Christianity is more united than all the branches of Judaism, trying to put them together. But we like thinking that we're all monolithic with a little bit of differences here and there. We're not. But the point is that, and that's a big problem, because if we want to believe that, we should know the differences. Okay, so we understand that. So the fact is that same thing with Muslims. That's this person's Islam. He's not going to go killing people. This person's Islam says it's a good idea to kill the infidel. Torquemada liked torturing people. No matter how many fundamentalists say Torquemada was, the Antichrist, the Pope was the Antichrist, and Torquemada was not a good Christian. Torquemada felt he was, right? The fact is that's a reality. So what we're asking for is to understand how we can define Torah in such a way that we can handle this perspective, understand that this is why this is fundamental to Torah. That a 9/11 cannot be followed within our understanding of Torah. He also said something interesting about a Navi. He said a thing about a Navi. Okay, how do you know if a Navi is true or not?
If they are going with or against Torah.
Now, how do you know he's telling you the truth? How do you know he really is a Navi?
If things actually come true.
Yeah. The fact is that there's a concept of a Navi Sheker, which is a guy who says he's a Navi and then tells you to do something contrary to the Torah. Okay. But then again, there's also the escape clause. Eliyahu Navi did something contrary to the basic Torah law when he lit the fires on Har Carmel, because he sacrificed outside of the Temple Mount. But a Navi also has a right in emergency situations to override the Torah law. So it's a little bit of a difficult concept of working out, why is he a Navi Sheker? Because he had this idea. Well, why is that? Well, that guy was trying to change it for more than one time, or for more than 100 times, or whatever. But the fact is how do you know someone's a Navi? So someone's a Navi, it's because he predicts a bunch of things. He's always right. He's not right 72% of the time. He's 100% right. If he's always right, you have to say he's a Navi. But the Rambam says something very powerful over there. That doesn't mean he's really a prophet. That means we have to treat him as if he is a prophet. In other words, God has told us if a guy does this and this and this and this, right, then you have to treat him as if he's a prophet. It's a good chance he is. However, and that's your obligation. But the fact is, it's still possible that maybe some guy got it right each time and still pulling the wool over your eyes. And the fact is that the Torah is basically saying, listen, if he meets the test, then you have a chiyuv to follow him. Even it doesn't mean the test was working on said it was that he was a prophet. He is to be treated as a prophet. That's what the Rambam says. So there's an interesting aspect that raises a question over here, in the sense that if you follow someone, and this is an interesting concept, you may have an obligation to follow someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually believe that person to be correct. It might be based upon the rules of Torah and so forth and so forth. This person's opinion has more weight than mine, even though I think I'm absolutely correct. And this is where you get into concepts of what's called the Zakein Mamre, a member of the Sanhedrin who had a very strong halachic opinion, and he disagreed with the Sanhedrin, but in the Sanhedrin he lost the vote. Okay, so the majority sided with A, and he held B. Right now, he really believes 100% that he's right, but the halacha is he had to follow the Sanhedrin, the decision of the Sanhedrin. So even though you 100% believe that this piece of meat is not kosher, and all your analysis tells you this piece of meat is not kosher, Sanhedrin paskin it was kosher, you got to eat it. Why? Because that becomes the halacha. Now that introduces a very interesting concept into the Jewish perspective. Behavior, when you talk about nasa and behavior, there is what you have to do, and then what is reality. And Judaism constantly makes that distinction. There is rules for determining what you have to do, and there's a recognition of what you really think is right. And sometimes what you think is right is not necessarily what you have to do, because there's other rules that tell you that you have to follow majority decisions, even though you think the majority is wrong.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Quinoa on Pesach.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What's the example?
Well, everybody loves it, and for a few years they said yes, it's fine, and in the last few years they've said no. When for a few years they said yes, and there's really no reason for them to say no. It's not chametz. It's not even a grain.
And you can't even add to the list. There was a list years ago based on certain things being used like grains, like the minim, and that depended where geographically you lived in the world, because different things were used as different grains in different places in the world. Mm-hmm. So with quinoa, you didn't have quinoa outside of South America, let's say, all right? So how could you determine in Eastern Europe not to use or to use quinoa? Because they didn't know of it.
Yeah.
All right, now suddenly we know about it. How can we say asur?
And it was okay, and then it got unokayed.
Yeah.
Well, the fact is you have to know something, but what the issue is, what you guys are, okay. You see, the fact is that the first interesting question is, who is they?
They're Jewish, don't say
No. But the point is, what?
No, Jewish, don't do that.
No, you're right. No, wait. So the question is what's the authority?
The gadol here, okay?
Okay, wait a second. So the fact is what is your relationship with the authority figure? Mm-hmm. One of the things that happens in Judaism is people don't recognize what exactly is the authority figure and what is your relationship with the authority figure, and that in our city, in North America, we don't have a normative halachic definition of authority. See, back in the old country, if the Rav of Minsk told the people in Minsk, this is the halacha, they didn't pick up the phone and speak to the Rav of Pinsk to say, hey, by the way, what do you think? Right? The fact is what the Rav of Minsk said, that's a halacha. Now, the question is, what happens if there's a guy who's a bigger Talmid Chacham than the Rav of Minsk, who happens to not be the Rav, but he's bigger? So the question is, well, what can he do in his own house or something? But vis-a-vis the community, the decision of the person in Minsk is Rav. So the fact is, you find a lot of times where a person say, listen, I totally agree with you, but he's the Rav. There's an aspect of authority that even though I think his decision is right, there's a certain aspect of authority. The question is today is, what is the relationship with our authority figures? And our authority figures are very, very hard to understand, because we aren't in that type of community where there's one methodology. And I'll bring it home much more. if a person was moved from Casablanca to Minsk in 1642, what do you think he did when he came to Minsk? Think he set up the Sephardi minyan?
No. He actually said Hatarat Nadarim and followed Ashkenaz.
If he had to. I'm not sure if he even had to do it. The fact is that's it. I know you ate, Casablanca they wouldn't eat rice anyways. I know maybe somewhere you eat rice. Guess what? You moved to Minsk, you're no longer eating rice. That's it. Now, this is a simplistic way of understanding it, but the fact is, there's a lot of more complications. You're talking about Teres Adarm. The fact is, it's only his, or it applies to his kids, it's only to his kids, and so forth. But the fact is there were authority figures. And the authority happened with some type of consideration. We live in a world where there's no communal authority figures anymore. Like, for example, Lubavitchers go to all these cities, and when they go there, they still follow Lubavitcher Minhagim. Well, guess what? If a Lubavitcher showed up in Minsk, and the Rav of Minsk held that the Vilna Gaon, you shouldn't put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, guess what? You're not putting on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. But I'm a Lubavitcher. Fine, go to Lubavitch. If you're going to stay in Minsk, you're going to follow the psak of the Rav. Now that's an authority concept we don't know how to deal with. So you have to deal who's the authority, what's the authority, and so forth and so forth. The truth is, though, there's another side to the issue, and this is the other side. What's the real problem with quinoa? Why did they ask for quinoa? So if you go to a website called Kosher Quest,
the issue of proximity grown to wheat.
Fact is that there's one quinoa that Kosher Quest allows, because they know that this quinoa does not have any contact with grain, but that there is proximity of quinoa growing around grain, and the potential for grain to be mixed in with quinoa. It's not the problem with the quinoa; it's a problem with the fact that the quinoa is mixed in. Okay, so it's the same with anything else in terms of Pesach.
Yeah.
So the fact is you go to the store, you buy kosher Pesach stuff. Tell me, did you ever come across a kosher Pesach quinoa? Guess what? I haven't seen a kosher Pesach. I haven't seen the OUP on any box of quinoa. But if you have, so the fact is that all you have is an OU. If it is there, I don't think it's an OU. All you have is you're saying, hey, wait a second. You don't know whether it really met all the other standards that we use for everything else in terms of Pesach. We're so makbid on those standards. So the truth is, the problem with quinoa was the fact. So if you go to the Kosher Quest website, and by the way, that website's an excellent website for any kosher issue. Kosher Quest. It's a Rav out of California. If you look at, I forget his name, but you look at it, he's got lists of what Jewish guy. Right. The fact is that you look over there, the Kosher Quest, what?
But wait a minute. You are now in sending us here, you are now doing what you're talking about. You're splintering us further.
Oh no, I'm basically telling you, as a Rav, I'm telling you that. From what I understand, on all these questions, like someone asked me a question this week about some product, right? And they said, this product does look kosher. I said, the truth is, I don't know the methodology of how that product is made. It looked like a product that would be simply, of course it's kosher. I said, the truth is, I don't know how it's made. You don't know. So the fact is, these people were involved in kashrus. They know all the working. So there's a guy who I have heard from various sources that this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's basically straightforward. Pretty much followed the halacha as I would understand it, and so forth. So therefore, I'm willing to rely upon him. Okay, but the fact is that it's not so. That's what I'm looking for. What I'm really doing is that I'm sending you to some other person who you can rely upon as an authority that you might want to rely upon. But the fact is that what I'm also telling you is that this issue about quinoa that they said okay, not okay. The fact is they found certain things about it that raised questions, and it wasn't the fact, as you say, because quinoa was kidneous. It wasn't this argument, well, quinoa was kidneous, because that argument doesn't, right? That was the real argument, right? But it was not that argument, because you can. the fact is kidneys is a lot, but the point
There's a movement that we should all eat like stardom anyway.
Okay, that's something different. That's the kidneys issue. But the issue with quinoa was not that it was kidneys, because kidneys can't really develop. But you know what I've just done though is I've just shown you something else though. There is two ways of looking at authority figures. Okay, one way of looking at authority figures is that they have some type of special connection to God, and their voice is like the Ruach HaKodesh and so forth and so forth. Therefore, if they have this type of connection, they're going to tell me the truth. There's other people who say, no, basically what they are is just smart. And the same way that if you're talking about the theory of relativity, you're not going to just downplay Einstein's opinion. If Einstein comes in and says, this is my opinion on that question, you sit there and say, gee, I think I should listen to this. The fact is that when you hear certain people say certain things, so when I hear someone of a stature saying a certain thing, I don't look at it as having some mystical idea. I say, gee, he must have a reason for it. He's not an idiot. Far from it. So then, I personally don't like quinoa, so it wasn't an issue for me. But the fact is that I'm very happy not that. But the fact is I checked out that one of the issues of quinoa was they were concerned about the production, like you are with any other basic thing. And that's why I saw this guy in Kosher Quest say, this guy in Kosher says, I know that this is one quinoa is not a problem. But the point is now you're getting a little bit more at the issue. The question is how you deal with authority figures is part of the issue. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the establishment of an authority figure for you, you have Pirkei Avot, you say, Aseh Lecha Rav.
Right.
That Rav is supposed to be your Rav, whom you go to from moment 1 to moment 10, cradle to grave, let's say. All right? And it's from that Rav. That Rav goes to the authority figures and then comes back knowing you with the answer for your situation. It's situational morality, situational answers. That Rav knows you. And even if that Rav gets the exact same question from somebody else, it's potentially a different answer. That's a Selach HaRav. That's an authority figure in the same sense of what I see, Europe, centuries ago.
Well, in Europe you didn't have the same aspect because the Rav of the city, asking for the city, and that even though you didn't necessarily like it, you followed. But the idea of Sedach Rav, first of all, I don't know if you have to stay with the same Rav from point 1 to point 10. If somewhere along the line you sit there and say, I want to make a new Rav, as long as you're going to be consistent totally following that Rav, I think you can switch over. However, what you're pointing out is
the splintering that has gone on.
But what she's talking about is a different form of authority.
Mm-hmm.
See, I start off by saying that there's a relationship between the self and Judaism. There's a relationship between the self and the individual. There's a perception that Torah speaks to the individual, and therefore, in that regard, you can look at. Oh, thank you. You look at maybe the highest ideal is what really is the highest ideal. So I know Rav Yaakov Weinberg held, heard this I think from a couple people, that really the highest ideal is that every Jew knows enough Torah that they can paskin for themselves. Okay, that would be the highest ideal. And the Rav therefore becomes your stand-in to make the decision for you. But he has to basically be your stand-in. Okay, so you're assuming him to know a little bit about yourself, about who you are, how Torah is speaking to you, and so forth and so forth. But this demands an interesting aspect, because when you start talking about Torah relating to self, what you're really doing is you're saying that the Torah is an outgrowth of the interaction between the self and the perceived statement of God, or the original understanding of the statement of God as you further analyze it. And then what you come up with is a perspective that is really based upon thought. That really what goes on there is a dialogue and debate over what does God really think, and therefore you take all the analysis and you analyze it with Torah. If Torah ultimately is an intellectual system, okay, and that is something that's tremendously lost in our world today. It is ultimately a system of thought that connects the individual in a dialogue with the Torah to understand what God is telling to me. It's not just me simply sitting back and saying, I like that, I don't like that. I like quinoa, therefore for me, I'm going to follow the people that, no, that's not the way it works. It's a fact that, gee, I would like to have quinoa, and there's a statement here, and this is the challenge. You go back and forth. What does God want? Because ultimately what you're trying to determine is what is the Tzivei Hashem, and because of its intellectual nature and because of its dynamic, complex nature, it can be directed to you as an individual. So therefore you have to be in dialogue. It's an intense intellectual perception. One of the great problems I have with our understanding of Gedolim today, and there's a little bit of a critique of the Hasidic methodology, is to me, a Gadol is a genius. He is an expert in the field. When I think of Gadol, I think Einstein, Darwin. It's, to me, Gadol is not Swami so-and-so with some mystical perception or something and so forth. To me, Gadol means the man's mind is beyond my comprehension. It's Albert Einstein, right? And Albert Einstein in Jewish thought, what a Gadol Albert Einstein would have made. He could have made it into the top 10, maybe. You know what I mean? You speak about Gedolim. There's a famous story of Rav Shver Soloveitchik that someone once came up to him and asked him if he could have a bracha, and the Rav responded by saying, "Why? Are you an apple?" No, which is really a very straightforward statement saying, listen, I'm not anything special. But he gave a bracha anyways, because But the point of the matter is his distinction was his mind, and the fact that he analyzed things and his conclusions was the best conclusion that a human mind can reach. But since all our human minds are distinct, because we're all individualistic, he had disagreements with Moshe Feinstein. But they both took that massive amount of information and came up with unbelievable, thoughtful, logical conclusion. It's not an authority because, whoa, this guy has some special thing. It's an authority because this guy has a remarkable mind. What that does is change the relationship that I have with that individual. A major Rav I respect once said to me, he says, "Do you understand what kind of mind the Rav Moshe had?" I said, "Yeah, I understand the kind of mind Rav Moshe had." We were talking a little bit about Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe was he's pretty smart, right? Okay. And this Rav, who himself was a big Talmid Chacham, said to me, "Yeah, it's possible I could argue with Rav Moshe in a psak. It's possible. Okay, if I spent a couple months specifically looking at that psak, and all the sheets and all the analysis, and spent 2 months working on that psak, it's possible that I could come to a conclusion in disagreeing with Moshe. But it will take me to work 2 months on it when he did it in half hour. Okay? But the fact is that when you're talking intelligence, it's quantitative. It's not qualitative. It's a quantitative distinction. So it's possible for me to be in the same ballpark. I have to recognize my limitations, but the fact is, now the truth is that I reckon, but I also recognize that we can work in the same world of thought, and we're talking in the world of thought. Okay, the distinction is not, some kind of special perception. When we talk about a Gadol not being like the Pope having infallibility, it's not to say, well, we can just disagree with anyone like that. It's because what we're saying is that we are trusting in the same way as you trust a genius doctor or a genius scientist, and you turn to them for solutions because you recognize you can't work with the material. You don't think you can, but on the same hand, you are still in the quantitative ballpark with that individual. That changes the dynamics. On one hand, you have tremendous respect. So in this statement that I heard this thing about quinoa, my immediate response is, okay, there's got to be an argument. There's got to be a reason. And that usually is the approach I have to many things. It usually gets me a lot of problems with a lot of people. Is whenever I hear statements, I don't simply deny it. So, for example, it's interesting because the only other person who had the same approach was Slifkin himself. Okay, everyone else immediately attacked everyone who attacked Rabbi Slifkin, and Rabbi Slifkin says, "Oh, the Gedolim had a reason." And everyone got upset with it. I wrote about what their potential, even though I disagreed with it, I put what could be their potential reason, because these aren't idiots. Okay? The people who speak for them may be idiots, but the fact is they're not idiots. So the truth is that you approach it that way, but it's no longer mystical. Once you've mentioned mystical, then basically what you've done is you abrogated your mind. Now that happens to be one of the reasons I happen to have a very strong negative feeling to the Mashiachas, for example. Okay? I'm not going to get into the theological issue, is it avodah zarah, is it not avodah zarah, the difference between the Boreno Mashiachas and the real and the other Mashiachas. There's Mashiachas who don't say Adonai Moreno Rabbeinu, say Adonai Moreno Borenu, and they had to be the dominant Mashiachas in Eretz Yisrael. Now the truth of the matter is that there's a book I'm reading by Rabbi Ben Zamoga from the 1800s, who was a big Talmid Chacham in the 1800s, who was considered to be Amy Pelye's Rebbe. Amy Pelye is the big man of the Noachide movement. He wanted to convert. He was told by his Rebbe, Rabbi Zoga, why do you have to convert for? You could be a good Noachide, and so forth. And he started pushing Noachism he wrote books on Noachism in France. So, but Rabbi Ben Zamoga wrote a book about Christianity and Judaism. Okay, differences in Christianity and Judaism. He made a very fascinating statement. He said that if you know Kabbalah, you see where Christianity got a little bit of its ideas from. Okay, so the fact is, and when you talk about the Boreno Mashiachas, who are already attaching a physical comment, and I remember seeing one person drawing a picture of the Rebbe, and the truth of the matter is, to me, if I was, to me, I can't understand how any Lubavitchers could tolerate it, because it's designed to the Rebbe that people should associate him with this type of nourishkeit. To me, it's a tremendous bizayon to the Rebbe. It would infuriate me that the Rebbe would be used to be this kind of nourishkeit. But the fact is that there's a picture I saw of Kriyas Yamsuf, and the Rebbe in his classic thing over Kriyas Yamsuf. And I said, what's Pshat? He says, don't you know the Medrash says is that what they saw at Kriyas Yamsuf was more than what they saw by Cheskel in the vision of the chariot. So what did they saw? They saw a picture of the Rebbe, which implies, what are you talking about? The Rebbe is now a physical manifestation of God? Okay, that's a Boreno Mashiachas, maybe, I think it is. But the fact of the matter is, what really upsets me about the Mashiachas, what really upsets me, is I find people who are Mashiachas. I say, one guy told me, these guys are Mashiachas. I said to him, let me ask, can you learn it all? No, mostly he can't read Hebrew, but he's a Mashiachas. Why? Well, he read somewhere that the Rebbe was interpreted to say that he was Mashiach. Really? Did he use any mind to understand what everyone else said? Even if you want to interpret that he said it, what about the 342 people who say no? And what about the people who say that's not the correct interpretation? How can you be a dogmatic individual saying this is the right thing, when obviously, in terms of mind, and you yourself have no ability to make a decision in that intellectual field? You're making that decision. The same guy says, I think we should operate. Well, I just got a feeling we should operate. I don't know what I'm doing, but we should operate. It's the same. You have a right to make a decision. Now, the truth is, everyone does have a right to make a decision on one level. Say the Charav. Right? You have the right to choose the individual who you think represents yourself in making those decisions. But the decisions have to be within the world of the intellect, the world of the mind. And therefore, it's a world that constantly brings up challenging and questioning and so forth. And that's the Jew's perspective. So the truth is, in our relationship to authority, authority is by definition constantly a dynamic relationship. We don't have the true authority. We don't have a Kodesh Baruch Hu telling us, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. We only heard from 2 mitzvahs. We don't have it. We have to trust Moshe Rabbeinu to bring it down to us. And then we have to trust other people to tell us. And the truth is, in that transmission, the transmission is through thought, And thought is activated through our intellectual analysis. So our relationship to authority cannot be with authority being placed on a mystical edifice. You start hearing someone trying to state, a red flag goes off. Like, wait a second, okay? Because the Masorah of Judaism is through the mind, okay? And through the mind allows us not to basically reject, but to make it that the dynamic of questioning is in part of it. And the key to that is, to me, is the famous statement by Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Why the Gemara in the Eruvin says, do we paskin like Beis Hillel? Because they quoted Beis Shammai first, which basically says there's two opinions, and I have to make a decision between those two opinions. And I understand the conflict of those two opinions. I understand the challenge. I understand it's not so black and white. And that I don't think occurs in that, because there's too much of a sense of an authority that is stifling of the dynamic nature of that relationship. In the Jewish perspective, the general gives an order, you have to follow the general giving the order, but the whole time the private's following the general giving the order, he's basically saying, what the heck is going on here? What's his thinking? What's going on over here? What's his thinking? And there's a certain point in time where that there's a tension where I think the guy may be wrong, but I have to follow him. But the fact is that tension creates the intellectual dynamics of that result. That's why the Akedah Yitzchak was such a powerful statement, according to the Medrash, that said, as soon as it was over, Avram immediately had questions. I did it, but the whole time that I did it, because it was very clear cut that this was the order, I had questions. And the fact is having questions, even while you're doing the action, is part and parcel of what's necessary. And those questions should strengthen as it gets into further, more and more issues. So if I'm told if I'm told that, okay, you have to, you can't turn the air conditioner on Shabbos. I know it's hot, it's under 2 hours, you have to be in the hot. Okay, I'm not going to do it. If I'm told I got to fly a plane into a building, wait a second. Now my questions come to the forefront. And it's a dynamic nature of that relationship. And the individuals have to be in constant conflict.
But this is our boundary in, where we feel that, this doesn't sound right anymore. They don't necessarily have the same boundary.
Exactly.
To determine, this doesn't sound right. As we know, there's a difference between logic and truth. And a lot of this is come to through a great deal of study and a great deal of examination of arguments to and fro, and examination of other cultures and why they failed and why this prospered.
What you're saying from the Jewish perspective?
Well, no, I'm saying in Islam.
Yeah.
In Islam, they have the masjids and they have the they have their madrasas.
Right.
Right. So they have a lot of study.
I understand that, but at the core. The
question is the value of life. We hold the value of life sacred? Sorry, just let me finish my point.
Yeah.
We read in our Haftorahs that Hashem condemns somebody who sacrifices his children to the Moloch, right? That uses child sacrifice as a means to worship of God. And therefore, for us, we cannot do suicide missions because we can't abide by it. But in that culture, it's a difference of.
Can you think of anything? Can you think of any case in our history where we did have suicide missions? It's a famous one right there in Tanakh. Shimshon.
Yeah.
Right. He was a suicide. Whatever, exercise or whatever.
Like 73.
Right.
Well, he did. It doesn't mean he wasn't commanded to.
He was also a Nazir. He was also a Nazir.
No, but Shimshon, there's a whole variety of issues. But Shimshon, when he knew he was going to be committing suicide by bringing down the building, but take a few Philistines with him, it's an interesting issue. The Cheshbon and so forth. But the point is,
but it's not a forethought approach in society as a legitimate method of dealing with humanity.
You're right, but the fact is that what I'm trying to say is yes, there's a lot of people involved in thought. Okay, within any religion, usually people involved with religion are geniuses, very, very thoughtful individuals. What I am arguing for, what I'm trying to present though, is that it permeates within Jewish thought. It should permeate down. When we start taking over concepts of mystical powers of an authority figure or something like that, I think we're leaving our roots. Now I know that people hold that way, but I think we leave our roots. The fact is though, in the end, okay, when what I see from the and I'm not saying there's different constructs and so forth, and that's obviously part of it. Islam has very different constructs. We look at those constructs and say, well, there's different constructs over here. But what I'm trying to say in the fundamental movement of behavior, the Jew is constantly in the dynamic tension of his mind. Okay, when we are told to do something, we are to see all the different aspects, and we are to move and to proceed with a certain dynamic nature of the challenge of that dynamism. So whenever you look at something within the Jewish perspective, it's almost like a conflict of values. Okay, an example may be the Aguna. The Aguna is usher. She's an Eshes, it's idolatry. But we feel bad for her. So if a woman who's an Aguna basically goes out and has an affair, we're going to sit there and say, listen, it's wrong, right? But on the other hand, we understand it. The fact is that's a tension that exists from our perspective, because we understand a lot of times in terms of value, in terms of the value tension of our existence that comes through our intellectual analysis of Torah. So in our mind, that's exactly my point. What I'm saying is that usually when you see people going through this type of religious fanaticism that could lead to a 9/11, it usually is based upon a dogmatic statement of religion. Even if that dogmatic statement comes from an authority figure who's a genius, it's usually perceived to be that authority figure is carrying the absolute word of God. From our perspective, it's like, that's the opinion I have to follow because he's the biggest genius around, and who am I to argue with him? And that's what he's going to do. So, but in my mind, I can have doubt, and my doubt is not problematic. Sakin Mamre cannot act upon his doubt, but according to most people, he clearly can teach his position still. We can always raise the question. Like, for example, so many times it's like, and the movement now in our world is, no, you can't have the other opinions. I go up to Lubavitchers, for example. I'm not trying to pick on Lubavitchers. Go to Lubavitchers and say, excuse me, tell me, what was the Satmar Rav's argument against the Tefillin campaign? Because you do know the Satmar Rav was very much against the Tefillin campaign. How do we do that? Well, what's the problem? Yeah. Then I'll go up to the Satmar and say, what was the Lubavitcher Rebbe's argument for it? No. If you're a Satmar, you should know the position of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and if you're a Lubavitcher, you should know the position of the Satmar, and you should move that I follow this psak because I follow this as my Rav. However, I know that the other sheet is connected, and therefore it's not 100% pure, the word of God. I understand it's a challenge, but this is the way I'm going to go. How many people really understand that tension? And once you have that concept of a doubt in the absolute perfection of the statement, it brings out the intellectualism, brings out the reality, brings out the involvement of the person, but also makes you think twice. Makes you really think twice. And what you end up with is that usually acts such as 9/11 come out of fanaticism. And the fact is that the greatest mark against fanaticism in Torah is the fact that Beis Hillel quoted Beis Shammai first.
But you're assuming somebody has the intellectual capacity to question all of this. If you've got uneducated and or unintelligent masses, or enough people, big enough mass of people, you have 9/11.
And the fact is that's a big problem. The truth is that's part of the tension. There was a tension in the Mishnah Hasidic Bible, according to certain people in the 1700s, because there was an intellectual elite, and the masses felt left out. So Hasidus started to work with the masses. On the other hand, what you had is you have a reaction to it. It used to get me, like, I read some stuff that really upset me, where it became like the intellectual elite was the evil ones. Right? They think that they're the intelligent ones because, they're better than us because they can think. Well, you know something?
But they could read. It's a place to start.
Well, the point is that, guess what? You know, it's like nowadays. You know, no one here is like really into natural travel, but my first kid, my wife, she had a couple friends who were pushing a natural childbirth. Better tell your doctor this, better tell the doctor that. Make sure he doesn't do this in the birth room. So I told my wife like this: say l'charav, you have a choice. You can choose the doctor, but I'm telling you right now, once you choose that doctor, okay, now you're not going to be in a situation where you're actually going to give clear-cut instructions from the doctor, from what I understand. So again, but the second one I understood that, right? So you're not going to be in a clear-cut instruction. So I'm going to be the person who's saying the instruction. So if he looks at me and says, "Should I do this?" I'm going to look at him right back in the eye and say, "You're the doctor." What? Because there was one woman who was really pushing my wife, like, "No, you have to do this." And so I told her, I said, "Excuse me, what's the medical background of this woman?" She took a science course in high school. She took a science course in high school, and she's going to tell me, and I'm going to trust her to tell me what to say to the doctor about doing this or doing that. I'm going to look at the doctor and say, "Don't ask me. You're the doctor." I mean, you know. Now, is it possible he could be wrong? Totally. But in balance of probability, I trust the fact that he'll be. The truth is that kind of attitude completely ignores any aspect of knowledge or intellect. So the truth is, you have to balance it. There is a problem when people start walking around with you know, being like, "I'm better than you because I'm smarter than you," because that's a problem. But on the other hand, it's a challenge to them. But the fact is that when you go the other way and sort of say, "Hey, everyone's equal," it's a problem. It's the way. That's why I'm saying with the Mashiachs, I got really angry about this guy. He has an opinion about the Rebbe being Mashiach or not. Forget about his conclusion. He has an opinion? Who's he to have an opinion? Yeah.
Do we have what would be the, I hesitate to say, more newly established advocacy of a midwife to intervene and advocate for the birthing mom and couple in the rabbinical world?
Okay. I have no problems with that. And the fact is you say, what do you call it? You have this yotze halacha in the Jewish world and so forth. So you can have that. I mean, the fact is any intellectual world, you can do that. I mean, a lot of times you talked about a Rav, where he goes back and asks another rabbi opinions.
Because he doesn't know himself and trusts the greater authority.
Or even when he goes to the other authority, he knows how to structure the questions.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean...
as important.
And that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to follow the other authority.
Right.
The fact is that anything in terms of the intellectual structure makes a lot of sense. Okay? Because it works out this type of balancing.
Mm-hmm. But what do you do if the people who aren't intellectuals, who can't understand the arguments, who are trying to follow religion, and that stuff about, like my mother, for example, all the niceties about kashrut or whatever, that's what turned her off Judaism.
Yeah, the fact is that's a real challenging question. That's a real challenging question, and that's a matter of how it's presented. And but the fact is in certain ways, it's the same way as going to a doctor. If you go to a doctor who's trying to tell you, "Well, listen, this is what happens and the bacteria is like this and blah, blah, blah." He says, "Listen, I really don't care. Just give me the pill and I'll go home. You know, thank you very much." But the fact is, but I want him to know it, and what I want is individuals to know that there is this idea that should be known. That's all I'm saying. And the point is that you're talking about the balance of knowledge and so forth and so on. And the other thing also is that it's significant that the learning that occurs is tied to real life. A lot of time people study and they do this and it's like they get more excited by study that has absolutely no application to real life whatsoever. Machlok is Rashi and Taisus, blah 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 blah, and this that and this argument, so forth and so forth. But in the end, it's all these 43 different opinions to tell you motherhood and apple pie. Good. So a person walks away saying it's a great intellectual exercise and so forth, but
get it back to ground zero.
But wait a second, it's not. It's all it is motherhood, because I could have figured it out on my own. If a person comes away and say, because of my studies so far, I've come to a certain conclusion, which you would not come through just with simple common sense, but as a result of mine, and I do it in such a way that you respect it without making you look like you're a total, outside the pale, then that's it. By the way, it really starts with a Seilach Rav. The first decision the individual has to make is to find that rabbi who they're following the decisions of that rabbi totally. Not I like it over here, I like over there, I like over there, but really understanding his direction. And then following through on that. Because that gives over the whole
system. That itself is difficult to do.
Right, and that's it. That's it. Not the rabbi who makes me feel good and says it's okay for me to not be so, whatever, right? Yeah. But the fact is that the one who says, listen, this is my system, and you choose that rabbi and you build up from there, and it's a matter of. Don't forget, what you want to do is also you want to allow the person to be able to make as much decisions as they can within this model, because you ultimately say that it is the idea of the individual as a thinker that I want, to the extent that the person can. So my perception is I want to make my student make as many decisions as that person can, right, within the intellectual framework. So what I'm saying is that in that perspective, does it mean that you won't have a 9/11? Most likely. Does it mean it's not possible that there might be some intellectual perspective that says in this perspective you do bring down a World Trade Tower for some reason? They bombed Dresden, killed a lot of innocents there too, because it was necessary. The fact is you hopefully have someone who's making that decision not because they're getting, excited by it, but because they recognize it. One of the big things I want to say, that just because I brought the Nazis and the Amalek, one of the fact is one of the big difference with Amalek in terms of a Jew is that as the Rav once said, Rav Yeshua Salvation once said, doesn't mean you have to enjoy every mitzvah. Maybe there's a mitzvah that for some reason there's a necessity to do this, but that doesn't mean you like it. And that doesn't mean you're happy with it. And then you're working out ways to get around it. For example, maybe Geras can work, maybe other things can work, maybe other things. The fact is, you're not getting into it in a dogmatic fashion.
That's the intellectualism about which you spoke. In terms of those various situations.
And dogmatism, and then eventually you create dogmatic passion, and you have people becoming animals because they feel this is the right thing to do, like a mob. This is the lynch mob, who are overtaken by this is right, and that's that idea.
Pinchas was celebrated, even though his selection of action was to murder his brethren. Many people died. And so is the reason why we won't undertake 9/11 because he didn't like what he was doing, or do we assume that?
The fact is that it's interesting you mentioned that about Pinchas. See, one of the interesting things that I always believe, like for example, when you're told that when Yoshua walked into Eretz Yisrael, he basically gave an ultimatum to the nations that get out or we're going to basically wipe you out. If you were in a world where you had God providing you man every day, the Anani HaKavod, the clouds basically being all around you, right? You basically saw miracles happening. You just saw the walls come crumbling down after you just walked through the river with the water being held up. Somehow he's working in a world which I have no comprehension of. So somehow in that world, right, there must have been something that came across the idea that this was a this was the only alternative. These alternatives were that way. Same thing with Pinchas. The Gemara specifically says that by Pinchas, you go back and forth whether Pinchas is right or not, but the Gemara basically says Pinchas is the only, even though we have a rule of Kanayim Pogimbo that a person who's a zealot can do this, they basically say that Pinchas is the only one who really we can trust did it for the right reasons. And whatever that right reasons were, we're talking about a world that we can't comprehend. I think that's very, very significant in any of our understanding of anything in the Chumash. You know, I remember I said this in the first class I did in this with the Chabura, my first year with the Chabura. I talked about Izebel. Was that my first or second one? But Jezebel, okay? And I spoke about how Eliyahu did his thing on Har Carmel, right? Okay, the Nevi Habal were over there, and the Eliyahu was over there. It says, okay, whoever gets their God to light the fire will be it. So Nevi Habal, he said, you go first. So they jumped around and did everything, lacerated themselves and so forth and so forth. All went crazy. Eliyahu said, you finished yet? Okay, listen, take your time. So half the day and so forth and so forth. He says, okay, my turn. Takes some water, throws it on the altar, just makes it totally covered in damp, so forth and so forth. He says, okay, God, light my fire. This happens in front of all these people. And then he goes around and kills all the Nevi'ei Habal, and Achav is right there, and the whole world says Hashem Hu Elokim, which is what we say on Yom Kippur. That's when they yelled it out, Hashem Hu Elokim. Right? Remarkable. This is it. God is it. Achav is right there. Right? Achav Rosh is right there. It says so. Goes home and says to his wife Izebel, you're not going to believe what happened. This just happened, right? No question about it. This man's got God on his side, wiped out all the Nevi'ei Habal. This is absolute proof of it. What does Izebel do? No, a little worse than that. She calls over the messenger, writes a little note to Eliyahu, and says, I just want you to know, within 24 hours, you're going to be in the same place that those prophets of the Baal are. Okay, where you put my prophets, I'm going to put you. She didn't get the memo. You really think about it, it's like, what, are you crazy? What are you talking about? She not only she like totally denies it, she sends and threatens the guy who just killed all the Nevi'ei Habal and did this remarkable miracle. Like, tug on Superman's tape. And then the remarkable thing is what does Eliyahu do? He heads down to Yehuda out of fear of Yezebel. Right? Like, whoa, what's happening here? The mixture of this world, you don't know what's going on, because Eliyahu says, I can't be Semech HaLemes. What are you talking about? You can't be Semech HaLemes. You can't rely upon miracles. It's a totally different world. And I mean, you think about this. So whenever I look at biblical stories, Chumash and so forth, there's derive lessons from it and so forth and so forth. But understand, you're talking about a world that you can't comprehend. So you have to take it with a certain amount of recognition, can't comprehend it. So the same thing with Pinchas. But I do know the Gemara basically says Pinchas was the only one. She's the Gemara say he's the only one who had it right, who would do such a thing with the right motivation. Okay, and it is a challenge. Okay, and we don't necessarily understand that. Anyways, so I hope I basically the dogmatism of the fundamentalists, Islamic fundamentalists, to me, that's the issue, and that's what's so sad about the understanding of God and religion. And this is I think a tremendous challenge to all of us, that as we get involved with religion, we get involved in passion and trying to do what? Exactly. And we have to be very careful about all these things and say, you know something? Understand the limitation, okay, of your passion. Understand that the way God really relates to us in many ways is by placing us in the hands of our mind. not to totally direct us without our passions. Our passions are part of our being, but to coordinate and organize and direct us. As I point out many times, is that we stand for God being one, and that means that and we said oneness, unity is the ideal. Passions exist. Our ideal is to try and maintain a unity of passions, a unity so that passions find their right place, and thought is what directs us in that regard. And therefore, that's what's really important, to maintain that type of idea. And whenever I see these things going on, all I see is passion, and I get upset by the reaction to passion being Jews having passion. So, no, we are not in the same battleground, right? You go scream all you want, passion. We're in the battleground of being Ovdei Hashem, by understanding God's direction to us is to create the dynamic of that intellectual fortitude of trying to understand this world within the dynamics of that connection.